This gate is one of the entrances to Constantinople. In times of peace, the Byzantines would open these gates to the public and to soldiers so they could enter the city freely. But in wartime, when the city was under threat, they would wall up the gate like this and block the entrance in order to keep the enemy outside. As you see here, the last wall built into this gate was when Mehmet II prepared to attack the city.
For months, Mehmet's spies probed the city for weaknesses. At the same time, Mehmet enlisted the help of a brilliant Hungarian cannon maker named Urban.
Bizans'a top dökmek için Avrupa'dan gelmiş olan Macar asıllı topçu ustası
Urban had actually come to town to make cannons for the Byzantines, but Constantine couldn't afford to pay his price. So he told Mehmet he could make him the best cannons in the world, and Mehmet agreed to pay him 4 times his asking price.
Kendisine beklediğin 4 katı bir maaş vererekten kendisi için toplar dökmesini istemiştir.
Urban built a battery of advanced artillery pieces, including the world's largest cannon. With a barrel measuring 26 feet long, the giant weapon could fire a 1,000-pound cannonball over a mile. The explosion could be heard 10 miles away. On the eve of the battle, Constantine sent a message to Mehmet. As it is clear you desire war more than peace, so let it be according to your desire. I will defend my people to the last drop of blood. The supreme God calls us both before his judgment seat. Mehmet responded, "The holy war is our basic duty as it was in the case of our fathers. Constantinople, situated in the middle of our domains, protects our enemies and incites them against us. Conquest of this city is therefore essential to the future and safety of the Ottoman state." On April 6th, 1453, the siege of Constantinople began. April 1453, just 2 years after becoming Sultan and just 9 months after completing the Rumeli fortress, Mehmet II was ready to attack Constantinople. Outside the fortress city, 100,000 soldiers, including a corps of elite janissaries, massed beneath the towering city walls. The troops donned chainmail armor and readied their weapons. Inside, Christian defenders braced for an attack.
The Byzantine army had about 9,000 soldiers. Of course, this number was nothing compared to Mehmet II's army of 100,000 soldiers. But the Byzantines had tremendous confidence. They believed their giant moat and 2 lines of walls were invincible in defense of Constantinople.
Mehmet's troops moved their siege towers and catapults into position and anxiously waited for the order to attack. On April 7th, Mehmet launched the first wave of his assault against the land walls of the city. But the defenders held firm.
The Ottoman soldiers who managed to get past the moat and the first line of walls ran up ladders that they leaned on the second line of walls. But the soldiers on these ladders came up against hot burning oil called Greek fire. This Greek fire would incinerate anything, including people. Also, Mehmet had built mobile siege towers as tall as the walls themselves. But these towers were made of wood and leather, and the Greek fire would burn them all.
huge number of foot soldiers who were not the elite Janissaries were used by Mehmed II as cannon fodder. And they were doing the initial damage by softening the city.
As ground forces continued their attack, 150 ships of the Ottoman Navy approached the city and readied their guns. Constantinople is on a peninsula, and Mehmet's spies had learned that the seaward walls facing the Golden Horn were not as thick as the land walls. But when Mehmet's navy tried to attack, the Byzantines were ready.
Before the Ottomans arrived, though, the Byzantines stretched a chain along the Golden Horn in order to deny access to the Ottoman navy. It was important because by denying access, they could concentrate the forces along the land walls.
Then Mehmet devised a remarkable plan. If he couldn't break through the blockade, he'd go around it. He would take 80 ships overland over a ridge 200 feet high and down again to the water on the other side.
It is quite extraordinary when you think about ships weighing many tons, several tons at least, being dragged on rollers up a very steep hillside for several miles and then being pulled down those rollers several more miles. You have this vision of hundreds of oxen and thousands of log rollers, probably greased with some substance or another, and men screaming and pulling in this very dramatic scene. And it probably terrified the wits out of the Byzantines.
Bu gemiler Haliç'e iner inmez Haliç surlarını
As soon as these ships made it into the Golden Horn, they started to fire on the walls. Constantine redeployed troops from the land walls, but this created a serious weakness in their defense.
Savunmada yer alan askerlerin
At the same time, teams of oxen and hundreds of men dragged Urban's monster cannon into position to assault the land walls.
yapabilmekte.
The giant cannon could only be fired 3 times a day. It would get so hot after firing that the Ottomans had to use olive oil to cool it down to prevent it from cracking during firing.
Atış esnasında topun çatlamaması sağlanmıştır.
The big gun, along with Mehmet's other artillery batteries, pummeled the walls.
Surların önüne 14 ayrı batarya yerleştirdi ve bu bataryalar
Mehmet had 14 artillery batteries positioned in front of the walls, and they fired day and night.
atış sistemi gerçekleştirdi.
To complement the big cannons, he developed a unique firing system for destroying the fortress. The cannons would aim at 3 points on the walls and fire continuously at these points.
Kısmı yıkıldı ve askerler yıkılan yerlerden surların içine girdiler.
On May 29, 1453, after 7 weeks of intense siege, Mehmet gave the order for what would become the final assault. First, a wave of irregulars weakened the Christian front line. Next, a second wave of regimental troops intensified the battery. Finally, a force of 5,000 Janissaries held back until the decisive moment moved in.
There were 2 reasons for that. One is that Mehmet didn't want to waste his best troops when it wasn't clear what the outcome would be. And secondly, the Janissaries were not that happy about being used as cannon fodder, and they expected to be thrown into battle when they could decide it, and of course reap the glory, which to a large extent they did.
The wall was breached. As the Janissaries rampaged through the streets of Constantinople, the surviving Byzantine troops panicked and fled. Emperor Constantine knew all was lost. He hurled himself into the midst of the enemy and was cut to pieces. For 1,000 years, the city had been a symbol of Christian dominance. Now, the city of Constantinople was in Ottoman and Muslim hands.
This had been the dream of Islamic conquerors all the way back till late in the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, when the first Arab attacks were launched against the city. And now, for the first time, this 19, 20-year-old upstart had done what nobody else had done. And this, of course, gave him great prestige throughout the Islamic world.
In victory, Mehmet had one last concern. He was obligated by Ottoman tradition to grant 3 days of pillage to the conquering army. The soldiers could legally take any movable property and could rightfully enslave any of the city's population. But Mehmet had no interest in having his new capital sacked. On the second day, he entered the city at the head of a procession and put an end to the pillaging. Sultan Mehmet rode triumphantly to the magnificent church of Saint Sophia and ordered it turned into a mosque. The Christian cross was torn down and replaced with a crescent, the symbol of the Ottoman Turks.
The Ottomans had captured the Second Rome. With the capture of Constantinople, the Ottoman Sultan became a Caesar, an emperor, the successors of Rome.
The fall of Constantinople shocked Western civilization. There were ceremonies of mourning in St. Peter's in Rome. Pope Pius II urged Mehmet to convert to Christianity. Instead, this Muslim sultan declared the city the capital of his Islamic Ottoman Empire. With this monumental victory, Sultan Mehmet had changed the course of world history and forever would be known as Mehmet the Conqueror. It was the beginning of the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. The conquest of Constantinople was a towering achievement for both the Ottoman Empire and its young Muslim sultan, Mehmet the Conqueror.
Once he conquered the city on the 29th of May, 1453, something that had been the dream of Islamic rulers for 700 years, he got unbelievable prestige.
Mehmet's new capital took on a new name, Istanbul. He quickly set out to rebuild. He refortified the battered city walls, rebuilt the city skyline, and commissioned his own great mosque.
What he wanted to do was to make Ottoman Constantinople, Istanbul, into the rich and powerful city that it had once been, to protect the past, incorporate it into the present, and use it as a foundation for his own authority and power.
With a location that bridged continents and cultures, the city had prospered for centuries through trade. The new sultan ordered construction of the legendary Grand Bazaar, still the largest covered street bazaar in the world, where textiles, crafts, jewelry, and spices were traded in an intricate maze of covered streets.
The Ottomans stood across the major trade routes that connected Asia, China with Europe. And Europe dearly loved Asian goods, including the spices of the East Indies. But the only way they could get those was if the goods passed through the Ottoman world.
Mehmet gathered whatever and whomever he needed. To revitalize the city's merchant class, he recruited tradesmen and craftsmen from across the empire. Everyone would take part in the city's rebirth.
He invites people to come and says, if you'll come and settle in my city, I'll give you free houses, I'll give you tax breaks, I'll make it economically very attractive. There are islands in the Aegean that are emptied, that he simply packs them all up and says, well, you're going to move to my new capital now.
Christians were invited back with the promise of protection. Jews in neighboring Salonika were encouraged to come to Istanbul.
His idea was not simply to physically rebuild a city, it was to ensure that the city had a population with